Jenny couldn't believe her luck when she got the response to her roommate ad. After 3 weeks of dealing with people who wanted to bring their 5 cats or turn the living room into a yoga studio, someone finally seemed normal. Well, mostly normal. The person who contacted her went by Zix, which was definitely an unusual name. But Jenny had met people with stranger names in college. They offered to pay double the rent, which immediately caught her attention. As a graduate student working to part-time jobs, Jenny desperately needed the extra money to cover her mounting student loans. When they met at a coffee shop downtown, Zix seemed polite enough. They were incredibly tall, probably around 7 feet, and had the palest skin Jenny had ever seen. Their eyes were unusually large and seemed to reflect light in a way that reminded her of a cat's eyes at night. But Jenny had grown up in a diverse neighborhood and learned not to judge people by their appearance. Zix explained they were an exchange student from what they called a very remote region and were studying human behavior for their anthropology degree. They spoke with a slight accent that Jenny couldn't quite place, and they had this odd habit of pausing mid-sentence as if they were translating their thoughts before speaking. "I am very interested in learning about local customs," Zix had said, stirring their coffee with intense concentration, particularly sleeping arrangements and domestic routines. Jenny found this a bit odd, but she'd had international roommates before who were curious about American lifestyle. She figured it was just cultural differences. Plus, Zix seemed clean, quiet, and respectful. They even offered to pay the security deposit upfront in cash, which sealed the deal for Jenny. The first week went smoothly. Zix moved in with surprisingly few belongings. Just a single black suitcase that seemed way too small for someone relocating to a new place. Jenny noticed they never seemed to use the kitchen much, and she rarely heard them moving around their room. For someone so tall, they moved remarkably quietly. But then the weird things started happening. Jenny first noticed that Zix had an uncanny ability to predict the weather. Not just general forecasts, but specific details like light rain will begin at 3:17 p.m. and last exactly 43 minutes. At first, Jenny thought they were just really good at checking weather apps, but she soon realized Zix's predictions were always more accurate than any meteorologist on TV. Then there was the way Zix talked to themselves. Jenny would hear them having what sounded like conversations in their room, but she never heard another voice. When she asked about it, Zix claimed they were practicing presentations for their studies. The strange part was that sometimes these presentations seemed to involve multiple voices, all coming from ZYX. The food situation was another mystery. Jenny had stocked the fridge with basics and told Zix to help themselves to anything. But after 2 weeks, nothing had been touched. Not even the milk had gone down by an ounce. When Jenny asked about it, Zix explained they had very specific dietary requirements and preferred to eat at restaurants that catered to their cultural needs. Jenny started paying closer attention to her roommate's habits. She noticed that Zix never seemed to sleep at normal hours. She'd hear them moving around at 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and sometimes even later. But during the day, their room was completely silent. It was like they had their schedule completely backwards. The plants in the apartment started behaving strangely too. Jenny had always struggled to keep houseplants alive, but suddenly her dying fern was sprouting new fronds, and her wilted spider plant was growing so fast she could practically watch it happen. The weird part was that most of these plants were in corners of the apartment that barely got any sunlight. One evening, Jenny came home early from her evening job at the library and heard the most unusual sound coming from Zix's room. It sounded like a combination of humming and what she could only describe as electronic beeping. The melody was actually quite beautiful, but unlike anything she'd ever heard before. When the sound stopped and Zix emerged for their usual late-night kitchen visit, Jenny asked about it. "Oh, that," Zix said, their large eyes seeming to glow slightly in the dim hallway light. "I was practicing traditional songs from my homeland. Very ancient melodies. They help with meditation." Jenny nodded, though something about the explanation didn't quite sit right with her. The sounds had been too complex, too otherworldly. to be just traditional folk music. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night when Jenny woke up feeling like someone was watching her. She opened her eyes and nearly jumped out of her skin. There, standing perfectly still at the foot of her bed, was Zix. Their pale figures seemed to glow slightly in the darkness, and their large eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Zix," she whispered, trying not to wake the neighbors. "What are you doing in here?" Zix seemed genuinely startled, as if they hadn't expected her to wake up. They blinked several times, and Jenny could swear she heard that same electronic beeping sound, very faintly, coming from somewhere near them. "I was studying," Zix said slowly, "human sleep patterns. For my anthropology research, I did not mean to disturb you. Your breathing rhythm changed, and I was observing the transition between sleep phases." Jenny sat up in bed, pulling her blanket around her. "You were watching me sleep?" "For scientific purposes only," Zix said quickly. I am writing a paper on human rest behaviors. I should have asked permission first. This is considered rude in your culture, yes?" Jenny couldn't help but laugh despite her initial fear. "Yes, Zix. Watching someone sleep without permission is definitely considered rude in any culture." Zix nodded solemnly. "I will make note of this cultural boundary. Thank you for the education." As her roommate quietly left the room, Jenny lay back down, but sleep didn't come easily. Something about the whole situation felt off. The way Zix had been standing so perfectly still, the faint glow round their figure, and that strange beeping sound all seemed too unusual to explain away as cultural differences. She made a mental note to install a lock on her bedroom door the next day. Living with an international student was one thing, but having someone conduct sleep studies on her without permission was crossing a line. Regardless of their cultural background, little did Jenny know, this was just the beginning of a series of incidents that would make her question everything she thought she knew about her mysterious roommate from that very remote region. The bedroom lock Jenny installed the next day turned out to be completely useless. She learned this the hard way when she woke up the following Tuesday to find Zix curled up at the foot of her bed like an oversized house cat. The strangest part wasn't just that they were there, but how they were positioned. Zix was lying in a perfect circle, with their knees tucked up to their chest and their long arms wrapped around their legs. "Zix," Jenny whispered loudly, not wanting to wake her neighbors, but definitely wanting to wake her roommate. "How did you get in here?" "I locked the door." Zix's eyes snapped open immediately, and they sat up with fluid grace that seemed to defy normal human movement. "Oh, hello, Jenny. Good morning. I hope you slept well." "That's not an answer to my question," Jenny said, pointing at her bedroom door. "That door was locked. I specifically bought a deadbolt yesterday." Zix looked genuinely confused. "Was it? I must have been sleepwalking again. This happens sometimes when I am stressed about my studies. In my culture, we call it dream wandering. I apologize if this disturbed your rest." Jenny stared at her roommate. "Sleepwalking doesn't help you walk through locked doors, Zix." "Perhaps the lock was not properly engaged," Zix suggested, tilting their head to one side in a way that reminded Jenny of a curious bird. These earth mechanisms can be tricky for someone not familiar with local technology. Jenny got up and checked the lock. It was definitely engaged, and there was no way someone could have opened it from the outside without a key. She made a mental note to call a locksmith and maybe invest in a security camera. The next incident happened 3 days later. Jenny came home from her evening shift at the campus bookstore to find all her clothes reorganized in her closet. Not just reorganized, but arranged in a way that seemed to follow some kind of rainbow pattern. All her red items were grouped together, then orange, then yellow, and so on through the entire color spectrum. She found Zix in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor and staring intently at the wall. "Zix, did you organize my closet?" "Organize?" Zix looked up with those large, reflective eyes. "Oh yes, I hope you do not mind. I was conducting a study on human color preferences, and noticed your garments were arranged in what appeared to be a random pattern. I thought perhaps organizing them by wavelength might be more efficient." "Wavelength," Jenny repeated. "I mean, color," Zix corrected quickly. "Organized by color. This is helpful. yes? Jenny had to admit that her closet had never looked so organized. But something about the precision of the arrangement bothered her. Each item was perfectly aligned, and the color transitions were so gradual and perfect that it looked like something a computer might do, not a human. "How did you get into my room this time?" Jenny asked. "I checked the lock this morning, and it was working fine." Zix paused for a long moment, and Jenny could swear she heard that faint beeping sound again. "I believe you left the door unlocked when you went to work today." Jenny was absolutely certain she had locked it, but she decided not to push the issue. Instead, she started paying closer attention to the other strange things happening around the apartment. Her electric bill, for instance, had gone down significantly since Zix moved in, despite having another person using electricity. When she mentioned this to Zix, they explained that they were very conscious about energy conservation and had learned techniques for maximizing electrical efficiency in their homeland. The plants were getting more bizarre too. Her previously dying succulent had not only recovered, but was now growing so fast that she had to repot it twice in 1 week. More strangely, she started noticing that the plants seemed to glow very faintly at night. When she asked Zix about it, they suggested it might be phosphorescence from the fertilizer they had been using. "You've been fertilizing my plants?" Jenny asked. "Only with organic compounds that are beneficial for plant growth," Zix replied. "I noticed they seemed unhealthy and wanted to help. In my region, we are very skilled at plant cultivation." The glowing footprints started appearing around this time too. Jenny first noticed them one morning when she was getting ready for class. There were faint, luminescent prints leading from Zix's room to her bedroom door, then back again. They looked almost like footprints, but they were longer and narrower than normal human feet, and they seemed to glow with a soft blue light when Jenny pointed them out to Zix. Her roommate looked genuinely surprised. "How unusual," Zix said, kneeling down to examine the prints more closely. "Perhaps this is some kind of chemical reaction? In my homeland, we sometimes see similar phenomena due to mineral deposits in the soil." "We're on the 3rd floor of an apartment building," Jenny pointed out. "There's no soil here." "Of course," Zix agreed. "Perhaps it is residue from cleaning products mixing with natural oils from feet. Chemistry can create unexpected reactions." Jenny wasn't buying it, but she didn't have a better explanation. She tried cleaning the prints with various products, but they seemed to fade on their own after a few hours. The conversations with her cat were probably the weirdest thing of all. Jenny's cat, Whiskers, had always been friendly but fairly independent. But since Zix moved in, Whiskers seemed to have developed an intense fascination with their new roommate. Jenny would often find the two of them sitting together, with Zix appearing to listen intently while Whiskers meowed in what sounded almost like a conversation. "What's Whiskers telling you?" Jenny asked one evening, finding them in their usual spot by the window. "Oh, he is explaining the best spots in the apartment for observing outdoor activities," Zix replied seriously. "He has very detailed knowledge about the local bird migration patterns and the habits of the neighborhood dogs. Quite fascinating, really." Jenny stared at both of them. "You can understand what he's saying." Zix looked uncomfortable for the first time since Jenny had known them. "Not exactly understand, no, but body language and vocal patterns can convey much information. In my studies of animal behavior, I have learned to interpret these signals." That night, Jenny lay in bed thinking about all the strange things that had been happening. The locked door incidents, the glowing footprints, the way Zix seemed to communicate with her cat, the mysterious plant growth, and the impossibly organized closet. Each incident by itself might have a reasonable explanation, but together they painted a picture that didn't make sense. She decided it was time to do some investigating of her own. Jenny started her investigation the next morning by setting up a small camera in her bedroom. She bought it online, telling herself it was just for security purposes. But really she wanted to see how Zix was getting past her locked door. She also began paying closer attention to her roommate's daily habits. She noticed that Zix never seemed to eat any normal food. The refrigerator remained exactly as full as when Jenny had stocked it, and she never saw Zix cooking or eating in the apartment. When she asked about it directly, Zix claimed to eat most of their meals at a special restaurant downtown that served traditional foods from their region. What kind of traditional foods? Jenny asked. Very specific dietary requirements. Zix replied vaguely, foods that are difficult to find in regular grocery stores, specialized nutrients that people from my region need to stay healthy. Jenny tried looking up restaurants that might serve unusual international cuisine, but she couldn't find anything that seemed to match what Zix was describing. She even asked some of her international student friends if they knew of any specialized restaurants, but nobody had heard of anything like what Zix was talking about. The internet research led her down a rabbit hole she hadn't expected. At first, she was just looking for information about different cultural practices around sleep and personal space, trying to understand if Zix's behavior might be normal in some other culture. But the more she searched, the more she found forums and discussion boards where people shared stories about unusual roommates with similar behaviors. There was a thread titled "My Exchange Student Roommate Never Eats," with dozens of replies from people describing roommates who claimed to eat elsewhere, but never seemed to actually consume any food. Another thread called "Weird Sleeping Habits" featured story after story of roommates who seemed to be active all night and never slept during normal hours. Most interesting was a forum dedicated to what people called unusual roommate experiences. Jenny spent hours reading through posts that described situations remarkably similar to her own. Roommates who could predict the weather with impossible accuracy. Roommates who seemed to communicate with pets. Roommates who had an uncanny ability to get through locked doors. The common thread in all these stories was that the unusual roommates claimed to be exchange students from remote regions and were studying anthropology or human behavior. Many of the posters had initially dismissed the weird behaviors as cultural differences, just like Jenny had. But the most unsettling part was a recurring theme in many of the stories. Almost all of these unusual roommates seemed to be particularly interested in human sleeping patterns. Many of the people posting described finding their roommates in their bedrooms at night, claiming to be conducting research or having sleepwalked. Jenny realized she wasn't the only person dealing with this kind of situation, but that raised an even bigger question. If there were dozens of people all over the country, Jenny spent the next 3 days gathering evidence. She printed out screenshots from the security camera, made a detailed list of every strange incident, and even collected samples of the glowing footprints in small containers. Looking at everything laid out on her desk, she realized how crazy it all seemed, but the evidence was undeniable. She decided to confront Zix during breakfast on Saturday morning. Her roommate was sitting at the kitchen table, staring intently at a cup of coffee that didn't appear to have been touched. "Zix, we need to talk," Jenny said, sitting down across from them with her folder of evidence. "Of course," Zix replied, those large eyes focusing on her with unsettling intensity. "Is there something wrong with the living arrangements?" Jenny took a deep breath. "I want to know what planet you're actually from." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Zix's pale skin suddenly shifted to a deep blue color, starting from their face and spreading down their neck and arms like spilled ink. Their eyes, already large, seemed to grow even bigger, and they began speaking rapidly in what sounded like a combination of musical tones and electronic beeps. "I knew it," Jenny whispered, staring at her now obviously non-human roommate. The blue color faded gradually, and Zix's skin returned to its usual pale shade. They looked down at their hands, then back up at Jenny with what appeared to be embarrassment. "How long have you known?" Zix asked quietly. "I started suspecting a few weeks ago, but I wasn't sure until I got this," Jenny said, pulling out a screenshot from her security camera. The image clearly showed Zix materializing inside her room without using the door. Zix studied the image with great interest. "Your surveillance technology is more advanced than I anticipated. We were told that humans had limited recording capabilities." "We?" Jenny asked. "There are more of you?" Zix nodded slowly. "Yes. There are several of us currently living on Earth as part of an exchange program. We are here to study human domestic behaviors and social interactions." Jenny leaned back in her chair, trying to process this information. "So all those people on the forums, with roommates just like you, likely other participants in the same program, Zix confirmed. We were each assigned to live with a human subject to observe daily routines, sleeping patterns, and social bonding behaviors. Subject, Jenny repeated. You mean I'm like a lab rat? Zix's expression shifted to something that looked genuinely distressed. Not exactly. The program was designed to be mutually beneficial. You receive help with housing costs, and we gather important research data about human psychology and behavior patterns. Jenny pulled out her list of strange incidents. Okay, so explain some of these things to me. The glowing footprints, the way you can walk through locked doors, the plant thing. The bioluminescent footprints are a natural characteristic of my species, Zix explained. We produce trace amounts of luminescent compounds through our skin. As for the doors, we have the ability to temporarily alter our molecular density to pass through solid objects. It requires significant energy, which is why I try to avoid doing it frequently. In the plants, my species has a symbiotic relationship with plant life. We naturally emit compounds that promote rapid growth and health in vegetation. I did not realize this would be so noticeable in an indoor environment. Jenny looked at her list again. What about the weather predictions? We are naturally sensitive to atmospheric changes and electromagnetic fields. Predicting weather patterns is as natural for us as sensing temperature changes is for humans. And you can really understand my cat. For the first time since the conversation began, Zix almost smiled. Animal communication is another natural ability. Your cat has been very helpful in explaining human domestic routines from a non-human perspective. He has quite strong opinions about your choice of morning alarm sound. Jenny couldn't help but laugh despite the surreal situation. Whiskers has been giving you reports about me? He is very fond of you, Zix assured her. He mostly complains that you do not provide enough variety in his food options and that you stay up till late studying. The conversation continued for over an hour. Zix explained that their species came from a planet in a distant solar system, and they had been studying Earth for several decades. The exchange program was relatively new, designed to gather more detailed information about human behavior by living alongside humans, rather than just observing from a distance. Why the focus on sleeping patterns? Jenny asked. Sleep behavior is one of the most important indicators of psychological health and social bonding in many species. Zix explained. The way humans create personal spaces for rest, the rituals around sleep preparation, and the responses to sleep disruption tell us a great deal about your species' psychology. So when you kept showing up in my bedroom, I was documenting your sleep cycles, dream patterns, and stress responses, Zix admitted. I can detect brainwave changes and emotional states through bioelectric field readings. Your sleep patterns indicated high stress levels, which I found concerning. Jenny stared at her roommate. You were worried about me. Yes, Zix said simply. The research indicated that proper rest is crucial for human health, and your patterns suggested you were not getting adequate recovery time. I was trying to understand what factors in your environment might be contributing to the problem, and it never occurred to you that having someone appear in my bedroom at night might be contributing to my stress. Zix looked genuinely surprised. Oh, yes, I can see how that would be problematic. I apologize. I was focused on the data collection and did not fully consider the emotional impact on you. Jenny shook her head, still trying to process everything she had learned. So what happens? Now, do you report back to your home planet that humans don't like surprise bedroom visits? The program is scheduled to continue for several more months, Zix said. But now that you know the truth, we can modify the research parameters. Instead of covert observation, we could work together on the study. You could provide direct feedback about human experiences and emotions. Jenny considered this. What would that involve exactly? You could help explain the reasoning behind human behaviors that seem illogical to us. For example, why humans keep plants they cannot maintain, why you pay for entertainment that causes emotional distress, or why you form attachments to objects with no practical function. You mean like sentimental value? Yes, that concept is very difficult for us to understand. We form attachments based on utility and mutual benefit. But humans seem to form emotional connections to things that serve no practical purpose. Jenny looked around their apartment, thinking about all the little things she kept for no logical reason. Photos from college, a coffee mug her grandmother had given her, books she would never read again but couldn't bear to throw away. "I think I could help explain some of that," she said finally, "but I have some conditions." "What conditions?" "First, no more surprise visits to my bedroom. If you want to study my sleep patterns, we discuss it first and set up proper monitoring. Equipment that doesn't involve you materializing in my room at 3 a.m. Agreed. Second, you have to answer my questions about your species and your planet. This is going to be a two-way cultural exchange. That would be acceptable as long as I do not share information that could be harmful if misused. And third," Jenny added, "you have to try some human food, real food. Not whatever you've been surviving on." Zix looked uncertain. "Our digestive systems are quite different from yours. I am not sure human food would be compatible. We'll start small," Jenny said. "Maybe some fruit or vegetables. I want to understand how different we really are." As they shook hands to seal their new agreement, Jenny realized her life had just become infinitely more interesting. She was no longer just a graduate student struggling to pay rent. She was now a cultural ambassador for the entire human race, helping an alien species understand what it meant to be human. The thought was both terrifying and exciting. The next few months turned out to be the most fascinating time of Jenny's life. Working with Zix on their research project gave her insights into human behavior that she had never considered before. Their first official study session involved Jenny explaining the concept of comfort food. She made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup while Zix took detailed notes about the preparation process. In her emotional responses, "You are combining foods that provide little nutritional value, but the act of preparation and consumption clearly reduces your stress indicators." Zix observed, "This is not logical from a biological standpoint." "That's exactly the point," Jenny explained, cutting her sandwich into triangles. "It's not about nutrition. It's about memories and feelings. My mom used to make this for me when I was sick. As a kid, eating it now makes me feel safe and cared for." Zix tested a small piece of the sandwich with obvious caution. Their face went through several interesting color changes before settling back to pale. "The taste is unusual, but I can detect the emotional satisfaction you experience from consuming it." "How can you detect that?" "Your bioelectric field becomes more stable, and your stress hormone levels decrease significantly. It is quite remarkable that food can have such psychological effects." They spent hours discussing things Jenny had never really thought about before. Why humans kept photographs of people and places from their past.